right. So we have a special guest today. And I like to speak with people from all different walks of life when it comes to podcasting and people that have been all over with the production side, being the host, being the editor, doing everything in podcast, because usually podcasting is a one-man show. But we have the one of the best podcasters doing it right now. Welcome to the show, Travis. How are you doing today? How are you
Oh, I'm
feeling?
awesome. I'm better now that we're here. That's all I can say. It's great to talk to you today.
I'm glad. I'm glad. It's always good when you're having a great day. But first things first, we have to ask because you've done it all and you've been all over. And I just spoke with you and you said you were a musician, so you know the audio world in and out. But how did you go from like being a musician, a producer to like I got to do podcasting now? There's always a story behind people going from A to B.
Yeah.
How did you do it?
So I was a professional musician touring the country, a gypsy, so to speak, just like living in a van, driving around, sleeping in parking lots. And every person that's in the arts has to know, like, okay, is this either going to pop off or it's not? And so I just decided that all my friends had condos and health insurance, and I just had all these experiences. So I'm like, I'm gonna throw in the towel. I'm gonna get a big boy job. So I got some stupid job in a cubicle, started driving, commuting, and on that commute, at some point I discovered podcasts and I would listen to them, and every single time I listened to them, I thought, wow, these sound bad. I could probably, with my experience, help people make them sound better. And that was literally my foray into podcasting, started helping people. And then I turned it into a full on just business. This is what I do full time. Is I'm all about podcasting. So as an extrovert who used to be on the stage singing and, moving around, for me, putting a microphone up and talking into it is very natural. So I do have a lot of empathy for those who are starting out that may not feel extroverted or feel like they have something to say. But music and podcasting, a lot of similarities, storytelling, hooks. If you study music, it will apply to podcasting.
I never looked at it that way. That actually makes a lot of sense. And you're the very first person that has made that connection between music and podcasting, which that makes sense. So why so many people, I think, I'm not going to say doing it wrong, because podcasting is new. So you can't really do it wrong.
Right. But so just to illustrate this point, in music, your favorite song starts off with a hook, which is typically the chorus, right? It's the most exciting part of the song because they want you to get it in your head and go through the song. And I do the same thing with podcasts. In the beginning, I put a hook in. I tell you exactly what you're going to learn, why you need to stay, to hook you into the episode, to qualify you for the episode. So that's just one example of many where podcasting and music production really are super symbiotic.
I'm just going to ask you, the next question was actually, what have you learned in podcasting that you completely got wrong? But we kind of segued into that a little bit. But what were you doing when you first started out that you were like, man, I wasted so much time doing this when I could have just been doing that?
Yeah. So I have a list as long as you are, right? So perfectionism. First of all, perfectionism and worrying about what other people think. So, it's very natural for us to want people to love us. But if you study art and you study artists and music and writers and all the people creating things, most of them did something that was true to themselves. And so in the beginning, I think I imitated what I saw happening. So that could have just been an interview podcast or putting an ad at the beginning of your podcast, things like that, things that made it look like the others. And when I just decided, you know what, I'm capable, I'm just going to rewrite my own history, I'm just going to start doing things that I want to listen to, that's when it really unlocked. So I think it's really great to have empathy for your listeners, because let's be honest, the podcast is for the audience. It's not really for us.
Right.
So you have to say okay, what are they doing when they listen? How long do they want the episodes to be? Do they like interviews? Do they like solo podcasts? But whatever you end up making, I look at it just like music. I want somebody to hear a podcast in 15 years and it to still stand up it's not nostalgia. It's quality information, quality production. So I think just, it's great to look for inspiration, but
Mhm.
turn that inspiration into your own thing, and you will set yourself apart from the crowd. You'll have more fun podcasting, and you'll make a new version. Again, music, right? All great genres come from people squishing other genres together, or building upon something that's already happened, and then we get this new iteration. Be the new iteration of podcasting.
I like that. I think a lot of people struggle there, trying to figure out what sets me apart from the next podcaster and how can I stand out, which kind of leads into the next question about growing your audience. If you can't stand out and you can't find a way to kind of like differentiate yourself, let's take the lane of entertainment or music podcast. There are, I couldn't count them. Numerous.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like a lot of them. How do you grow your audience when you are one of so many?
Sure. Yeah. So I think this is probably, besides discoverability in some capacity, this is probably the biggest struggle for most podcasters. So my advice is to, when you're doing something that is maybe, let's call it saturated, there's other
Okay.
podcasts. You have to find your unique angle. And
Mhm.
so a quick way to be able to do that is to take two things that don't really go together and marry them together. So the most basic example is like peanut butter and jelly, right? They don't really go together, but when you put them together, you get this really cool thing. So if you're doing an entertainment podcast, you need to think about how you can bring entertainment to people in a unique way. Don't just copy TMZ or whatever the person is before you. Or if you're doing a music podcast, I think Song Exploder was a really great example of somebody who did something different. They started talking to artists and pulling in stems and listening to what was happening. So try to come up with something that is off the beaten path, but still in your genre. And then you will become the magnetic outlier in that group, because it's not just another music podcast. It's like this meets this, right? And when you can explain that to an audience, it's much easier to get them to invest. So when I say invest, I'm going to use Hollywood as an example.
Okay.
They're doing all these reboots of movies. You see it left and right. And it looks like they don't have any new ideas. But the truth of the matter is that in order for you to get to your $15 put in to get a ticket, they want to show you something that you're already sort of invested in. So they don't want to show you things that are too new and out of this world. They want you to be like, oh yeah, I remember that movie. Maybe I'll see the reboot. So your $15 is more likely to go into that bucket. So your audience needs to be able to figure out what you do quickly. So you need to come up with a great quick way to explain it. And I like to use kind of like. So my podcast is kind of like Joe Rogan meets Song Exploder. So what you're doing is you're pretty much making an investment for them with their time, because we're not selling anything from podcasting. But then they can go, oh, I like Joe Rogan and I like Song Exploder. I'll check this out. Or maybe they don't like either of those, and then they can go find something else. So those are two quick ways where you can kind of illustrate to the audience. But it is very important in podcasting to know who you're for and who you're not for.
Okay.
And I think too many podcasters are like, oh, my podcast is about everything and it's for everyone.
Yes.
That works if you want to spend 20 years doing it, which is fine. It's totally possible. If you want to grow faster, you have to say, well, my podcast is for single dads who live in, an apartment complex, who hate their life and want to start a side hustle and have a better relationship with their ex-spouse, right? Very specific. So if I'm a single dad and all those things, you have me.
Right.
So it's really important to be able to at least illustrate who it's for and who it's not for. And when I say it's not for, I don't mean like being rude about it, but like if you have a podcast for single moms, then I'm a dad. I don't. That's not for me, right? So I know I can go check out the next show.
Yeah. So don't waste people's time. Is what you're saying, and like a long story short. But I do have a question.
Yes.
So about paid promotion, a lot of podcasters have jumped on social media paid promotion. In your expert podcast opinion, does it work? Is it worth it? Should we? Shouldn't we?
I think it's worth it. So here's my thought. We all complain about Facebook and Instagram and YouTube. These companies have all this data, right? We just complain that they're grabbing our data. But what you don't remember is that you can use that data. Like you can go into Instagram. I just did this on my Instagram. If you're interested in it, I show you exactly what I do. It's at Poddex. I made a post that says, "Dear podcasters, I want to help you overcome obstacles and give you tips and tricks once a week." And then it's a picture of me pointing to my podcast art. I go into Instagram and post that, and then I press boost post. And for $1 a day, it's $30 a month. What is that? Like 2 Chipotles? I don't know, right? So so for $1 a day, I can go in and say men. So this is like, I know my general target audience. I could say men ages 25 to 44 who are interested in podcasting, only show this to them. And then what happens is Instagram uses the data they have and they show it to the right people. So no matter what niche you're in, if you're like, I like cross stitching, there's probably a cross stitching interest on Instagram, and you could just show those people your post to promote yourself. So I think it's wildly underrated. It's super affordable. You don't have to spend $50,000 promoting, and you could target, this is where everybody gets it wrong. They post a podcast and they go, where is everybody? But reach, like if you think about reach, it's like you're reaching out, right? So you have to do things to reach your audience. And paid, unfortunately, it doesn't feel good all the time, but it works.
Okay. Because I know at some podcasts, it's like, oh, it's podcasting is so organic. I can't, we can't pay for that. It's organic. It's intimate. And I don't see anything wrong with you trying to grow, because what are you doing it for if the goal is never for anyone else to hear it? But that brings up a good point. When is it time to quit? Like, when do you look at your numbers and say they're not moving? It's time to move on, or you shouldn't really be focusing necessarily on those numbers?
So I'm a big proponent of not looking at download numbers. I look at 2 things in my podcast. One, I'll compare one thing to the other. So interview podcast versus my solo podcast. Does one stick out more? Because if it does, that means that's what people want. So I'm going to make more of that. And then 2, in the Apple Podcast Connect dashboard, you can look at the statistics and it will tell you the average consumption of your podcast. It gives you a percentage. So let's just use the example, 72%. That means on average, people make it 72% of the way through the entire podcast. So if your numbers are low there, you have a content problem because people aren't going far enough. That could be it's too long. That could be it's too boring. It could be too quiet. There's lots of things it could be, but it's a good indicator of, can you get somebody to listen to all of your podcasts? Because that's really the goal. And those are the only 2 numbers I look at. I'm not selling ads. I don't have to prove to anybody that I'm cool. So download numbers to me is just a vanity metric. Now, when to quit is an internal question, in my opinion. Are you having fun doing it? Is it causing you more stress than it's worth? Are you chasing unrealistic expectations? Are you really putting in the work in order what it takes to grow a show, or are you willing to put in that time? A lot of people like to stream an entire season on Netflix, but they tell me they don't have enough time to do engagement on social media, right? So you just have to decide, like, podcasting never ends. That's the weird thing about podcasting is you start a podcast, but there's no end date unless you set one. So if you're not having fun doing it, I would say that's a great indicator to quit. I would never look at the download numbers and say that represents my art. Like, no analytics dashboard is going to tell me what my podcast is worth.
Okay.
And then, right? Like that's crazy. So if I post an episode tomorrow and it gets 50 downloads in a week, the average creator's mentality is, oh, I only got 50 downloads. But it doesn't end. People are still going to listen to it. Oh, how do you measure something that never ends? So you're assigning a value to your art based on a small period of time, and then you're letting it affect you wanting to create more art.
Yeah, art is, but I think some podcasters can't connect the two. I was like, this is art, this is your creation. It may not be, you're drawing a picture or a painting, but it is art. Now, you kind of mentioned something. I kind of want to go back to this slightly. So you said you should be tweaking your content to your audience, but not necessarily changing completely who you are. You should still be making content that makes you happy. Is that right? How do you balance the two?
Yeah, that's tough. So it's very subjective. So, I mean, if you could, and this is the way I think about podcasting, I just make this is the way I think about everything. I make art, I make music, I make podcasts. I just make the stuff that I want to listen to.
Okay.
And that makes me happy to make it. I do always have the end user, the end person in mind, trying to enhance their life, whether it be value or shock or, all the emotions that you can attach to it. So I think if you're doing it for what you want it to be, it makes it feel less like work.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm always going to be looking at, what are people resonating with? Because if I'm an interview podcaster and then I do one solo episode and I get 10 times as many downloads, it means people want to hear more from me, not just my guests. And so that's a great thing to look at as far as okay, I should be making more solo podcasts. Doesn't mean you have to change your style, but it means that people want more of you. And I think podcasters often think that they just need to interview somebody, when in reality, people might be more enamored by yourself as the host than they are your guests. So it's just something to look into to make sure you're not just doing the thing you should be doing and doing the things that your audience wants you to be doing.
So you should be finding out, if I can sum it all up, you need to know who your audience is to begin with. Who are you targeting to before you can even grow your audience and have great content and longevity? So it all starts with doing research.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's easy tools like, let's say you're on Instagram. You can set up your account to have insights, and it'll tell you exactly where the people are, how old they are, what gender they are, and you can say, okay, then most of my audience is most of my audience is men. It's 75% men, right?
Okay.
Does that mean I don't make content for women? No, it's just I know that men are more attracted to what I'm doing. So I can keep that in mind. And you have to know who you're for and really who you're not for, because if you say you're everything to everyone, it's confusing. But if you say, because people ask me all the time, what's your podcast? And I say, well, hang on a second. Do you podcast, or are you interested in podcasting? And they're like, no. I said, then you won't like my podcast, because that's all it's about. So let me just save you the time. And, we'll see the download numbers go up and down, and we feel bad when it goes down. But what's happening is that people are figuring out that this show's not for me. And so they go somewhere else. So if you can consistently tell people exactly what it is and who it's for, you'll get less of the variance in the numbers. And then, yeah, I mean, I believe in quality content. Don't you? I'm sure you do, right?
I do. Yes. Even as a listener, a podcast listener, because I was a podcast listener first.
Yeah. And then you thought, this is exciting, I'm going to do this. And then you put a lot of effort into it. We're sitting right here I can see the effort being put in. So I do think that all the gurus are going to tell you, just be consistent. But if you're consistently putting out something that sucks, is that good? Or would you rather put out something that you're really excited about when you can? It gets philosophical in that capacity.
That makes a lot of sense. Before we get into Poddex, because we have to talk about Poddex and what that is. Chartable. Do you like things like Chartable? Do you loathe things like Chartable? Are those things that we should be paying attention to?
I think all tools are good if they're used for the right reasons. So I just did a post on Listen Notes, which shows you your global rank amongst the 2.6 million podcasts, right? So it shows you if you're in the top 10% and they give you a listener score. Now, I think looking at that is healthy to see, do I rank? Is there room for improvement? But I don't like it if you're going to look at it and feel bad about yourself, because there's 2.6 million podcasts. So there can only be so many in the top 10%, but that gives you something to work towards. So I think if you look at it objectively as just like a barometer, yeah, but obsessing over it is a complete waste of time. Make great stuff for a specific amount or a specific group of people. That's where podcasters win. Now, Joe Rogan, everyone wants to be Joe Rogan. He's an anomaly. Okay. Famous 5 times, took him 10 years to get where he was. And he can talk about anything, but that's him. Not you. Not me. And there'll probably never be another one. And to be honest with you, I haven't made it through an entire Joe Rogan episode in 5 years because it's too long.
Okay. Got time for that. That is very true. That makes a lot of sense. Now, you are a owner, CEO, a creator of a fantastic business for podcaster, and this is Poddex. So Pod
Yeah,
Deck, can you tell us what it is, how we can reach it, and how it helps people like small podcasters like myself?
absolutely. So I created this tool called Poddex. This is what it looks like. I'll see if I can get it in focus here. Maybe. It is a deck of cards that has unique questions on it. So you can literally shuffle this deck up, pull a card, and spark a great conversation. So I'll ask you, what's the weirdest thing you've ever seen in the middle of the road?
That's a great question. Probably a dead animal, like a possum. I don't
Okay.
see too many crazy things.
All right. I've seen some pretty crazy stuff in the middle of the road. I won't get into that right now. But the idea here is that
Not a body. I hope it wasn't a body, like or
I've
anything
seen a
like
dead
that.
body before, yeah.
Okay, in the road.
On the road,
Oh,
yeah. Car accident, like, yeah.
oh, okay. Well,
So you got to
yeah.
remember,
Right.
I traveled I traveled the country for 15 years straight, so I saw it all.
That is very true. That
Yeah.
is very, very true. And you
Like,
probably
wear your seatbelts, people. Just they're in the car. Just put it in. Boop. You're good. Okay. So the idea here is that some of us may be new podcasters. Some of us may need help planning an episode, or we just want something at our disposal in case we get red light fever. And we just, you ever get to that point in the interview where you're like, I just forgot what I'm sort of doing. So the idea being that you can create a fun and spontaneous reaction in your podcast. You can become a better interviewer, and you can get different answers than most people ask. So, so they're in physical deck form, and then we also have the mobile app that has over 4,000 prompts in all kinds of different categories. These the interview decks that I have are non-industry specific, so you could ask them to anybody,
Okay.
and you're going to have an interesting conversation. And so, what I wanted to do was empower people who may feel like they're extroverted, they don't have a lot of time to research, to have these great conversations and make great content. And then, I've found all kinds of other uses for them. Go live on Instagram and pull these cards and just watch the comments roll in. Post one on social media and watch the comments roll in. Take them on a date and get to know your future spouse. Communication is so important. Like, this, like we've had an incredible 18 months, and we've gone through some things that I don't believe we would have unless this all happened. Okay. And part of that is a societal conversation, right? That we needed to have. And that just made me realize even further how important communication is. Like, if you and I disagree, that doesn't mean we have to be enemies. That just means that we have two sides to whatever we think, right? And but unless we discuss it, then it's just resentment and hate, and that's stupid. So I'm all about communication, and I'm all about podcasters having more fun and not just being another copy of a copy. Like, yes, the questions might be the same, but the answers are always different.
Oh yes, and I love that. That you I love how you ended on that. That was amazing. And that question, when I tell you, I probably would have never asked that question ever in life.
Yeah.
I have to get a deck so that I can ask more, I guess, insightful and interesting questions to people that kind of throw them off. I'm like, in the middle of the road. I don't know, a pothole. I love.
Well, the answer could be as crazy as like a car accident. It could be a random item in the middle. I mean, and so the cool thing is like, let's say you get your bucket list guest and they've been on a bunch of other podcasts. They're going to get asked the same questions over and over again. And you pop off with something interesting. They may share with you something that they've never shared on another podcast. And that makes your podcast interview stand out from everybody else. And it's going to make the guests more excited because they shared something they're not on repeat, right? They're not on the circuit. So, pod decks aren't for everybody, but they're a lot of fun. And if you're into fun and spontaneity, I think they'd be right up your alley.
And I am. And that's why it works for me. I think you could even play this like a drinking game with your friends.
Without a doubt.
To figure this out. But if someone wanted to purchase, can you go to poddex.com in order to get you a deck?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can go to poddex.com. We've got 5 physical decks right now. And one of them is actually called the episode deck. So it's 50 unique episode starting prompts. It looks like this. Looks like the old composition notebook. See if I can get that into focus. Yeah. So So you have no excuses. If you want to start a podcast, let's say your guest cancels or you don't have any ideas. I've got 50 ideas, which is essentially a year's worth of episodes where you can create something. You could plan your episodes. So I don't want anybody pod fading. I want people to always have ideas and unique conversation starters at their fingertips.
And I love that. And that's what kills a lot of podcasts. They run out of ideas. So we appreciate you keeping us smaller podcast. We will never compete with Joe Rogan, but we can definitely continue to do it because we love it. And I appreciate you coming here. And if someone wants to follow you on social media as well, can they find you under your name or under Poddex?
It's just at Poddex on Instagram. That's the only place I'm at. I make a bunch of really awesome tips, tricks, strategies, all kinds of stuff around podcasting. And that's a whole nother story, but I only spend my time in one place. And I'd love to have anybody join the community of podcasters over at Poddex.
Awesome. Yeah, I thought for sure he was on TikTok dancing. I could feel it. I could feel it in my soul. But thank you so much for coming. You have given so much great information. You have saved 100 small podcasters. I'm sure thousands of them when they hear this. So I appreciate you.
Well, I appreciate you. And I just want to let everybody know, if you can take the time to stop and leave a comment or a 5-star review for this podcast, there's creators out here that are putting great stuff out into the world. And it's the least you could do to support this show is just drop a line, drop a comment, say something nice. And